Happy Friday, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. We are just giving it a couple moments for people to get settled into this virtual learning space. We are so glad you're here. We've been expecting you as we do every single week during this hour. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. Shout out the NWC team. And you have joined the Intentional Conversations podcast. This is our 5th-year anniversary of bringing intentional conversations to the broader community so that we can learn with and from each other. And we are super excited about this milestone. It has not been an easy feat. And so we are glad to be able to express our appreciation to our community for allowing us to be able to get to 5 years. Without you showing up, there would be no us. So we're really grateful. Take a moment to please go to the chat and let us know where you are joining the conversation from today. It always is a great treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented. We also are very appreciative for those who wish to connect with this community beyond this hour by sharing your LinkedIn information. So I do invite you to share your LinkedIn information in the chat. My team will drop my information in there. And if we're not connected, I certainly look forward to getting connected. But this is a way for us to continue dialogue, continue building community around topics that are important to us and kind of connects us. And we know that because you've joined Intentional Conversations, you value dialogue regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it intersects with leadership and business. And so we look forward to great conversation today. We're going to use the chat area to be able to create that sense of community and to get proximate to each other. If you are joining us by LinkedIn Live, we have not forgotten about you. We're glad you're here. And we want you to know that you can also go to the comment section and add your sentiments, your thoughts, your questions. All of that is being brought into our Zoom chat community so that we can be connected. And we are glad that you're here with us. At NWC, we truly value disability inclusion. So with that in mind, we do have closed caption that has been enabled for those who could benefit from it. And it's our way, again, of showing up to the people with disabilities. And so I hope that you will lean into that opportunity. Once again, you have joined Intentional Conversations podcast, and we are so glad you are here. Sit back and enjoy the show. Let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we are about to do. Again, if you're just tuning in, you have joined the Intentional Conversations podcast. We're celebrating 5 years, and I am Dr. Nika White. As we normally do, I want to just center us around some of the national observances that are taking place during the month of May, because we are now in the month of May 2nd to be exact. And May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think this is so important for us to lean into and to make sure that we're talking about it with great level of clarity, with great level of reverence for the need for us to be in great mental strength, right? Because it's something that we know a lot of stigma is attached to, but let's do what we can to self-soothe, to lean into radical self-care, which is how I refer to it, and to help others that we care about, that we're in community with, to do the same. I also want you to know that May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so this is our way of just being challenged to build up our cultural intelligence, our cultural humility regarding other communities, specifically this month, AAPI. And so if that's something that you have not done yet, then make sure that you see that as a challenge for yourself to do so. I think that we all can learn and have greater perspectives when we are extending our networks to those who may not already be in community with us. Now, for those of you who celebrate Cinco de Mayo, I want to go ahead and give a heads up because you have an opportunity to do so. I know a lot of folks are going to be connecting to gather for celebrations with friends and with family. And so I do want to recognize Cinco de Mayo. A little fun fact that our guest host actually shared before the top of the hour. She mentioned that a lot of people may think that Cinco de Mayo is about its Independence Day, but it's not. And so if you are one of those individuals who are of that persuasion, then hopefully this is some newfound information that now you can rely on as you think about and engage in Cinco de Mayo. Now, one of the other opportunities that we really lean into at NWC is when we have an audience, we like to share some different opportunities of program offerings that feel very important to us and relevant to the day and time. And so we have a program called Boundless. It is a women's community of well-being, empowerment, and leadership. This is a way to connect through a community of practice to create meaningful impact, to have safety in just expressing our thoughts, our experiences, and to confidently navigate our journeys with a lot of different complexities that each of us may experience. But now we get to do it in partnership and community with others. So if you're interested, my team's going to drop a link, and we hope that you will take advantage of learning more and being in discussion with us about how you can bring it even to your organization. Another opportunity is storytelling culture framework. I'm really excited about this. We have been talking about it all year long. We have a video series of all about storytelling. I think that storytelling is something that helps to connect us. It helps us to deepen our empathy, our compassion, our ability to get proximate to someone's lived experience. And it is a great connector. What I'm finding, though, is that not a lot of organizations are intentionally embedding storytelling into its culture and its operations. We want to help you do that. And so if you're interested, we're going to drop a link for you to learn more. And we look forward to being in conversation about our storytelling culture. And as I just mentioned, we also have a video series. And so I wanted to bring to the conversation to this podcast community that if you're interested in being exposed to small tidbits of clips of video messaging that deals with, again, how do we elevate storytelling and how do we place it into our everyday leadership and interactions? And this particular one is elevating storytelling from a soft skill to what I refer to as a power skill. But there are tons of these. We release a new one every week. And so if you want to join our YouTube channel, you'll have these short videos that you also can take advantage of. Now, before I get to the moment in time where I get to officially introduce today's guest co-host, I want to let you know what you have to look forward to in future weeks in the month of May by way of our guest co-host. We have Kelly Cornish, who is the president CEO of the TD Jakes Foundation. She has a rich history prior to her current role in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and working in all type of executive corporate spaces. And so I'm so excited to have Kelly to join us next week. I hope you will be here as well. That's 11 to 12 every Friday Eastern Standard Time. And then the week following that, on the 16th, we have Elise Ahin Cora, and I'm so excited to have Elise as well. So that's going to be on the 16th. Lots of great things ahead. I hope that you will protect your date and time. You will share it out. Maybe if you can't be here live, know that you can always catch the replay, or you can always catch the podcast version as well, because every show we extract the audio and we make it available in podcast capacity for those who like to get their content on the go. Now, we're at that point in time where I get the pleasure of introducing our guest co-host. And if you've been with us, you know that we have a tradition here. We don't just bring our co-host on. We take the time to read their official bio because it is so important to me for our community to understand the accolades, the experiences, the credentials in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so today will be no different. I will actually introduce our guest host by reading her bio. Shari Dunn has built a multifaceted career spanning law, journalism, executive leadership, and academia. She is the author of Qualified: How Competency Checking and Race Collide at Work, which was published by HarperCollins Business. As CEO and principal of ITBOM, which is actually I'm the Boss of Me, she specializes in institutional consulting, systemic equity and inclusion, and change management. Shari has written for Time, The Hill, and Fortune, and she has been cited as an expert in the Wall Street Journal and Ad Age, among many others. She has appeared in NBC News Daily, Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien, and The Whitney Reynolds Show on PBS. Throughout her career, Shari has received numerous accolades, including Executive of the Year from Portland Business Journal, which is actually where she's joining the conversation from today. Among her proudest moments as a journalist was the opportunity to interview civil rights icons Harry Belafonte and Julian Bond. She holds a Juris Doctorate from Northwestern University, Pritzker School of Law, and Bachelor of Arts in the History of Philosophy from Marquette University. Committed to transforming individuals and organizations, Shari believes that to create meaningful change, we must make the unconscious conscious and challenge the systems that shape are thinking. You know what to do now, podcast community, as I stop sharing and as I bring our guest co host into the spotlight. I want you to find those emojis, find those words of affirmation, those accolades, all the things, the reactions to let Shari know how excited we are that she's here today, how much we value the insight that we know she's going to bring. And also, what I want you to know, Shari, while the audience is kind of leaning into welcoming you in their own way, I want you to know that we have a tradition here. And that
Okay.
tradition is that before we release our guest co host to share and greet the audience in their own way, we always ask that they consider sharing something with our community that we would not know from hearing your bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so glad you're here. And I want to turn it over to you to greet this audience.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. What an amazing introduction. I know you know it's always interesting to hear your life read out. You're like, oh, that's interesting. So something you would know, well, you actually would know it if you looked a little bit, but one of the things that people always find interesting is that I'm a game show winner. I was on the daytime version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Now, I did not win a million, but I was a high winner and quit and took my money with me. And it was hosted by Meredith Vieira at the time. So there's like there was like the Regis Philbin, and then there was the Meredith Vieira. And so, yeah, that is something that people always find interesting. But I always been interested in trivia.
Yes.
Back when I could remember more when I was younger.
Yes.
But yeah, so there you go.
I love that. How many of you, just thumbs up or some kind of reactions into the chat, how many of you recall How to Be a Millionaire? I think that we all remember that talk show host. It was always very intense, especially when it got towards the end, because that's
Yes.
the one like with the suitcases, right?
No,
Is
no,
that,
that's Deal or No Deal. Who Wants to Be
oh,
a
that's Deal or
Millionaire?
No
You sat
Deal.
in a circle and then they would reveal the answers to the
Um,
questions and the audience, and they would have that music. And then everything became celebrity. Regular people can't get on anything. It became celebrity who wants to be celebrity. All these celebrities just taking up all the regular people's spots.
You know what? You were so right about that. As I think about like Dancing with the Star, I mean, all of like the reality shows have gone to
Yeah,
some degree to some type of celebrity version. And
right.
yeah, it leads me to kind of think about, the people who aren't celebrities, the regular, just, people day in and day out
Yeah,
living their lives. There's something to be said for continuing to amplify opportunities for us. So
that's
it's
right. Regular people.
regular people, yeah. I mean, the word regular is kind of, yeah, certainly can be qualified better, but we know what we're
Yes,
talking about. Just people
yes,
who don't
yes.
have the status of,
Uh-huh.
the fame that's kind of attached to certain roles and professions and things of that nature. So, yeah, that is very exciting. So you mentioned that you are really into like trivia. Has that always followed you? I mean, I'm thinking about your law career, your history, the work that you do in academia. Has that always been something that's followed you?
Well, I think it's the curiosity, right?
Yes.
I was a curious kid, and still curious, and so I think that's just part of being curious is being interested in little tidbits and things of that nature. So yeah, I think that's it.
Makes perfect sense. So we were scheduled to have you on, I think, quite some time back, and you were
Mhm.
in the midst of course, your books. Things got really busy, but we were so grateful we were able to get you rebooked, and so glad that you're here today. So let's jump right in. I want to capitalize
Yay.
on as much time as we have. As this community has heard from me reading your bio, your career spans across so many different categories and disciplines, law, journalism, executive leadership, academia. What I want to start with is how Shari has the collective of all of those professional experiences shape your approach to how you show up to the work of equity and inclusion.
That is such a great question because I use this quote from Maya Angelou, you get to a certain point in your life and you look back and you go, I wouldn't take anything for the journey now, right? Because all of
Yes.
those pieces lead to today. And so, my background as an attorney, my background as a journalist, all those things really impact how I work with clients and how I work in the equity space, bringing a little depth and multidimensional approach to what I am saying. And I always understood where the lines were. And I think that there are definitely people in the consulting space, not just DEI, but all consulting spaces who
Right.
sometimes don't quite get that. And then
Yes.
adult education. I was just at Oregon State University yesterday and the day before yesterday speaking. I did a keynote for 600 undergraduates at
Mm,
their business school. And what I was saying to them is, you over your lifetime, you learn all these elements that you can apply
right.
to a variety of situations. And so one of the things is adult education. As
Yeah.
a equity consultant, I think understanding how people learn and how they don't learn is very important. So all of these things, the law, journalism, teaching, all of those things come into play pretty much every day in doing the
Yes.
consulting work, which is kind of wild.
Yeah. No, it's actually not wild at all. It is very resonant with me because I do believe that all of our experiences really have a role in helping to shape exactly how we're showing up to maybe our current profession, even if it's not directly related. I talk
Mhm.
often about my pathway and my background in Marcom, so we share a little bit of that.
Mhm.
But I say to people, I use those skill sets every single day because part of helping to do the work of equity and inclusion, it's not just about facilitating systems change through strategy, but it's also how are we shaping the narrative? How are we controlling the narrative? How are we
Mhm.
bringing people along? How are we providing the clarity that's needed so that resistance is kind of kept at bay? And we also share some experience in academia. My
Mhm.
master's degree and a lot of my training has come from adult learning, e-learning, corporate training, instructional design, and so that is definitely within the wheelhouse of how in which we like to facilitate our philosophy around learning and development.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about your book, Qualified. You explore the intersection of competency checking and race at work, which is very interesting. And I know exactly as a woman of color why they intersect the way that they do. But what inspired you, Shari, to write this book? And what do you hope readers will take away from it? And what have you heard that readers are really gravitating to based upon the rich content in your book?
Well, those are all great questions. I guess the first thing I would say is the very first line of the book is that Black women are the canary in the workplace coal mine. And they have been signaling for years that something is devastatingly wrong,
Years.
right? So
Yes.
that's the first line. So that gives you a sense of what motivated the book is as a
Yes.
consultant, I was hearing these stories from Black women and other women of color, and they were almost verbatim what was happening to them in the workplace, what was being said about them to them, what their barriers were. And they were in different industries. They were in government, they were in nonprofits, they were in for-profits, they were in the arts. And so I thought, okay, like there's no way all of this is happening in isolation. There's too much trend to it. So that
Yes.
sent me on the journey. And as I say in the book, the canaries sent me on this journey, but it's a bigger journey than that. I was thinking the other day about Dr. Gay from Harvard and
Mhm.
how she was, in fact, the
Yeah.
canary in that coal mine, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
here now Harvard is facing potentially trying to get their tax exempt status pulled. And so what I say in the book is that, the conditions that are inhospitable for Black women in the workplace mean that workplace is going to be inhospitable ultimately for everyone in some way or another, specifically for those who are minoritized groups, be they women,
Yes.
LGBTQA, or whoever. So Black women and their struggles really are what motivated me to write the book. And what I hope people get out of the book is something deep and concrete about the what, the why, the how, and what to do. You know, a
Yes.
lot of times when I've read books around race or race in the workplace, they either describe something, but they don't describe why, or they
Yes.
describe why, but they don't describe what to do or and so it was really important for me that this book do multiple things. One, name something deeper. Like if we say unconscious
Mhm.
bias, that's a big topic, but what
Yeah.
is it? And so that's where I came up with the concept of competency checking and to name that specifically and then go into why it exists, how it exists, and then what to do.
I love this conversation. There's so many places I want to take the topic next, but I want to stay right here for a little bit. And by the way, we will share into the chat a link for people that are interested in actually getting your book. And I hope that everyone here will certainly get a copy of the book and we'll share it out with those in your network. I love the practicality piece of it. I think that is critically important. It's not enough just to bring the news of the doom and gloom, if you will, and
Mhm.
even the contextual understanding of why and how we've gotten to that place, but what can people do to get out of it? And I'm hearing you say that you peel back all the layers and you give them every single bit of
Mhm.
that in the book, which is great. Um, and, this notion of this is not something that's new. Women have been, Black women in particular, we have been very vocal about our experiences time and time and time again. And it feels like the louder we scream, right, the more noisier we get, there is even greater denial by some parties, right? But what I'm
Mhm.
also very much encouraged by is that there are a number of entities, leaders, that are starting to lean into it more and create spaces and places that can help rectify the healing that needs to take place so that women can live in this knowledge of being highly qualified, highly competent, and to stop some of the self-soothing habits that we have had to put in place for survival when we were told time and time again that we aren't worthy, we aren't qualified, we aren't competent. So I
Mhm.
would love for you to share with us in your words, how are you defining competency checking?
Mhm.
Because we can
Yeah,
check, is it a frequency thing? Is it a cadence? Is
yeah,
the attitude that
yeah,
goes with it? So
yeah.
unpack that for us.
Yeah, so competency checking, there are three primary, though not exclusive ways. There is the assumption of Black intellectual inferiority, which is
Yes.
historical. It is
Yes.
not something that is new, and it's not something that has shifted over time. Really, it's metamorphosed, but it hasn't really shifted. And so and I go into the historical reasons for that. So, and then there is the fear of Black leadership and authority, and so I call it almost an autoimmune level rejection. People
Mm,
reject it. I don't want
yes.
this. I'm not comfortable. And then there's the quizzing and confirmation. What do you know? How do you know it? Who told you that? Do you really know it? Can you verify how you learned that? And so, competency checking, in short, is the ways in which Black, other people of color, and women are required to prove their knowledge at a higher, harder standard and bar to get a job, keep a job, and advance in a job. Now, common knowledge, people think it's common knowledge, and this is people of color too, that the reason that there aren't Black people in certain jobs is because they aren't qualified or where they're not in the pipeline. But what I talk about in the book is there are people in the pipeline, but the pipeline is
Right.
blocked by competency checking.
Yes.
So this creates a barrier for people and it makes it harder for them to keep their job. What we know actually from data is that Black people tend to have more education, more experience, and are
Absolutely.
underemployed, meaning that they are in jobs that are in fact not commensurate with their education or experience. So that tells us that there's a pipeline of people, they're just not getting through. And so
Mhm.
competency checking was my way of disaggregating these big concepts. Oh, this is unconscious bias, this is right. Okay, but how does it work? And I talk about in the book, like if you talk about housing discrimination, well, that's a big word, but you have to break it down. Loan discrimination, when you're valuing your house, there's discrimination there. Red line, you have to pull the pieces apart so you can have the right
Yes.
solutions. So that's the goal of competency checking, to be able to pull apart how the mechanism is working so we can get the appropriate solutions.
Yeah, and it's a great example of how we need to look within the systems to solve for a lot of these issues instead of like just through some surface level solutioning. And I think this is also why a lot of women of color, people of color, will live in the space of what's referred to as imposter syndrome. And I say what's referred to as because I don't believe in it. I think it's a misdiagnosis
I got a
oftentimes.
whole chapter about that.
Not surprised. I was going to say, I'm sure you probably talk about this. So share a little bit of your reflections on the
Yeah.
imposter syndrome phenomenon.
Yes, I have a chapter called Unmasking Imposter Syndrome. And the
Yes.
reason is because I think it's a misidentification. It's a
Yes.
misidentification of the impact of systemic inequity. So, systemic racism, sexism, patriarchy, white supremacy. If you are in spaces and places where there's no one like you, of course, you're going to feel insecure. You're going to feel uncertain. That doesn't mean you feel like an imposter. The problem I
Right.
have with imposter syndrome is that it comes from research from 73 to 78. It was
Mm,
178 upper middle class white women.
mm,
It didn't even really identify what was happening to them at the time properly. That's the problem.
mm,
Instead of recognizing, hey, these women from 73 to 78 are going through the biggest societal change for women since the Industrial Revolution, they were
right.
the first white women in professional workspaces. So, of course, they felt insecure. But instead of looking at that, the research tended to blame them for their own feelings of insecurity. And I think it's a destructive paradigm because it shifts the burden of the blame. And I tell people, you have to figure out, is the call coming from inside the house or outside the house? And in the case
Yes.
of competency checking, it's coming from outside the house. Most
Mm,
of what we are thinking about as imposter syndrome is really the result of what it feels like to be competency checked. And if we understand that, then we're going to have different solutions. If we think imposter syndrome, just we need to have better self-talk and have a better opinion about ourselves, you are totally missing
mm-mm.
what is going on. But if you understand that you feel uncomfortable in the workplace because nobody is like you, it is in fact hostile, you do, then you're going to understand that you need systemic change, right? So I
Yeah.
am not a fan of imposter syndrome. Do not like the framing.
I'm with you. Yes, it wasn't designed for us anyway. So, no matter
No.
what you do, you're not going to be able to change the circumstances. Yes, can
Mhm.
we self-soothe? Can we have some bandages we can put on it while we're trying to navigate it, perhaps? But yes, we have to address the system. Yeah. And I love the fact that you brought in, if we don't know what that feels like, that it's almost impossible for those who are trying to solve for it, the issues within the system to be effective. And that is why we need to have people who have direct lived experience of what that feels like to be a part of those conversations. You referenced Dr. Gay earlier today, so you're
Mhm.
talking about Harvard, and there's so much we could say about that situation as it relates to competency checking and
Mhm.
and again, all that we just talked about that shows up in systems that causes women of color to not necessarily have this strong sense of self. Um, have you been, I'm sure you've been following some of what's been trending in the media of lately. We know that that situation happened with Dr. Gay, a lot of criticism around it. And then we also fast forward, we see that Harvard has come out with some other big news that has had them continue to trend into the media. One of late is that they have quietly kind of pulled back some of their DEI. Have you seen some news of that? And this
Yeah.
was, prior to them taking some other very, unique, bold moves, like opening it up, to for no cost and things of that nature. Just help us to share from your point of view, do you feel like is happening within the Harvard system and how in which they've shown up with all of these varying messages over the past
Mhm.
several months?
Well, like I said, I think Dr. Gay was the signal that something was wrong. And instead of drawing the line there, they
Yeah.
moved the line. And because they moved
Mm,
the line with the situation we're in, with the people who are against a just, equitable, and diverse society, if you give them an inch, they will take
oh
100,000,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So when they gave an inch with Dr. Gay, that set them up to exactly be where they are today, which is trying to navigate a hostile act toward an educational institution. And so, on the one hand, as you say, they are really one of the first institutions to stand and fight these
Yeah,
executive orders because they should. They are one of
they
the oldest,
should. Yeah.
the oldest educational institution in this country. They have money and power to do so. So if they are frightened and bowed, we are all in trouble. But on the
Yes.
other hand, they quietly changed the name of their Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Center to Community or something
Yeah.
else, and so on the one hand, you're going to bow to the pressure as it relates to this naming, but on the other hand, you're going to take it to the mat. My feeling was take it all to the mat. You cannot
Yeah.
outlaw the word diversity. You cannot
Yes.
outlaw the word equity. That's insane. And even in them making that change, they are giving too much ground. And so on the one hand, we, appreciate the fact that they are really the first institution of higher education to truly fight back about these executive orders because they're trying to push into not just how the entity is run, but what they teach, which is
Right.
bananas,
Right.
right? So this is a
Yes.
perfect example of if they would have gotten their stuff together, is another S word, stuff together, when the
Stuff.
attack on Dr. Roxanne Gay or on, well, not Roxanne, the attack on Dr. Gay happened, then they would have been ready and better prepared for what was going to happen. See, people think you can appease folks like this. There is no appeasement. Whatever
Mm-mm,
you try
none.
to do, they're going to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's what Harvard has found out.
Yes, absolutely. And what's disheartening about, and you've referenced this, Sherry, but when we saw that even after the Dr. Gay situation, where they came out with this really strong stance, we're talking about Harvard, this strong message. I think we all were sitting back like, okay, so this is a way to kind of rise to the moment, especially even in consideration of the blemish that's now on the Harvard brand by what happened with Dr. Gay. And then fast forward. So I would say that all of the value of their strong vocal um, stance on continuing to fight against anti-DEI. But how do you think that has now started to impact people who were really hopeful when they saw them rise to that occasion, and now it's like all the changes are kind of subtly taking place? Is that performative? Is that how should people interpret that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank the commenter for the Claudine gay because I said no, not Roxanne, because I do sometimes twist
Iconic.
the two together. So I appreciate that.
Yes.
But yeah,
Thank
I
you, Andrea.
mean, you know, we are human. And human beings are faulty and contradictory, right? And multiple things can be true at once.
Yes.
On the one hand, Harvard is fighting for academic freedom, and they are trying to draw a line in the sand. On the other hand, they might still be in this situation, but they might be better prepared if they would have not given ground in the fight over Dr. Gay. And there is no value in them secretly changing the name of the office because the folks, again, who are against a diverse, inclusive, and equitable society have made it very clear they don't care
Very
what you
clear.
call it, they're coming for it. They're going,
Hmm.
if there's a hint of content that relates to making an environment safe, inclusive for groups who are not the dominant group, they're going to try to destroy it. So there's no hiding. It's like futile in a sense of doing that. So I think you just have to look at the Harvard situation with the complexity it is, right? There's no perfect person, there's no perfect institution, there's no perfection here, so.
Yeah. Well stated. Yeah, we have to realize that sometimes it's necessary to sit with two truths at once, and one thing does not have to necessarily fully negate another. I appreciate that. I'm just wanting to unearth some of what's happening into the chat. Folks are really appreciative of how you're showing up today and what you've shared so far. Someone has talked about, they love the fact that your book speaks not only to the depth of the what and the why, but also to the how, giving actionable steps for Black women and other marginalized communities. Toki says the trauma of the burden to be better. Yes, we all know about that, right? The burden to be better. And I do want to go ahead and address this question. Normally, I will wait until the end and take all questions, but since we just were coming off of this topic of um, competency checking, a
Mhm.
question that someone in this community has posed is, what is the best way to prepare our youth to defeat competency checking in the workplace? Yes, what age should we start them? What does that even look like? Share your thoughts, Sherry.
This is so complicated because in the book, I really talk about trying not to put this burden on Black people.
Mm,
Like,
mm,
we're not the ones primarily competency checking, although we do competency check each other. We do that
yeah,
because we live in the world, breathe the air, drink the water, bathe in
right.
a
All the
society
things.
that a society that marginalizes us. So we do interpret that. What I what I talk about in the book are the ways in which structures and institutions can change. And I try not to put so much burden on us to be just the people
Yeah,
responsible because it's hard. What I would say is to identify for young people that a historical narrative so they understand this isn't actually about them, that
yeah,
this is a shadow puppet fight
yeah,
about people who are not, this is not a reflection on them. And so when they see it, they can name it and they don't internalize it. I think the
absolutely.
danger is that when young people encounter competency checking, especially young people who don't really have a lot of historical grounding, they think, oh my gosh, I'm wrong. I did something wrong. And they really beat themselves up. And I think we really want to make sure that they are able to separate that out from their own identity and help them understand that their goal is to do all the things that they can do to prepare themselves to be in spaces and places and try to find a way to build alliances with each other across all kinds of differences, so race, gender, and build these strong relationships with people in the workplace that you can call upon. But the main thing is to also call out what you see happening and to
Yeah,
constructively try to say, hey, I'm very curious about this. I noticed that, Todd was promoted and this is my resume. These are my skill sets. I'm curious, what would you say is a key difference and how can I, like it's not like
yeah,
you promoted him, you make me sick, but really forcing
yeah.
people to go through their process. But ultimately, the book has a lot more remedies for white people and a lot more remedies for
As it
systems
should.
because they really need to bear they
Burden.
are blocking their own blessings
Mhm.
by the way they enact competency checking on Black and other people of color. And so they really need to be invested in removing these blockages.
Yeah, that is a great way to talk about they're blocking their own blessings because obviously we know that if people are in spaces and places where they don't feel like their competencies are well valued and recognized, then those individuals are not going to show up at their best. And therein lies some opportunities for how do we best create that safety and that security and full opportunity for success so that the output collectively, institutionally, system wide is being optimized. But yes, I love the recognition of placing the burdens, the heavy, heavy burdens on white people and on the systems. That is precisely what I think needs to be amplified in these types of conversations. Now, you also use language like unconscious conscious, make the unconscious conscious. I want to unpack that as well. Can you let us know what that means and specifically in context, Shari, of organizational systems?
Yeah, well, it's so funny. Like I said, I spoke to 600 business students the other day, and that's the first quote that I have on the slide is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that's a quote by
Mm,
Carl Jung, the psychotherapist. So I have an undergraduate degree in the history of philosophy, so you got to
mhm,
go with me on that. But for me, that really means that until we make these unconscious ways in which we are operating conscious, we will say that that is just the way it is. It is fate, right?
oh, yeah.
So consequently, we think there aren't a lot of Black people in executive leadership positions because there aren't qualified Black people to be in executive leadership positions. And we believe that as fate. And we say, oh, that's it. And then we start having programs designed to help these unqualified people who don't know what they're doing figure out how to be in executive leadership positions. Well, what's unconscious that we need to make conscious is no, we have qualified people. We have set up artificial barriers that are preventing them from getting through. And our goal is actually to remove these barriers and
Mhm.
let what would be a natural flow of people through. But we have these barriers that are blocking them. Prestige bias, competency checking, shifting standards model. We have all these things that are blocking them and we need to remove them. So the what we think is fate, what we think is true is wrong.
Mm,
And the
yeah,
only way we're going to understand that if we make the unconscious part conscious. Does that make sense? So that's kind of and so that's the only way systems change that way too. If we look at a system of hiring and we say, oh, we just don't get any people of color when we advertise. We just don't know why.
yeah,
What is it in the system that we think is fate that is not? Oh, we don't advertise any place people of color are,
right,
or we
right.
use an AI model that is inadvertently weeding out too
Right.
many people of color, or our list of qualifications is not even really relevant to the job, making it smaller and smaller. Or my favorite,
Mm.
we are doing referral-based hiring, which is
Yes.
30 to 40% of how people are
Yeah.
hired. But here's the thing about referral-based hiring. It is almost exclusively a system that is closed that favors white people
Right.
90%. So,
Yeah.
so there you go. So there's all these unconscious things that we just think are things and we don't think they're really a problem when in fact they are.
Yeah, I take issue with referral-based hiring for that very reason, especially if an organization is already not well represented
That's
across
right.
different cultures. And the same happens at board levels. You hear people
Mhm.
say, well, we know we need a diverse board. We need a board that has representation across many different backgrounds, ethnicities, etc. But we don't know where to go to find them. My first question is always, well, what is your process, right? Because it's always in
Mhm.
the systems and it never fails. Their process is, well, we have our existing board, which, by the way, you've already said is pretty much a sea of sameness, right? To recommend and nominate folks for our open board seat. And I guarantee these individuals could be very well qualified board directors, but they're probably people that maybe are in their communities. Maybe their kids go to the same school, perhaps they attend the same gym, whatever the case may be. But they are probably people who look like them, right?
Yes.
And that's not a ding on anyone because we gravitate to people who are like us. But if you're trying to solve for a problem that is very systemic, you're going to have to get out of the normal routine of what you naturally would gravitate to do to solve for it. And so I love that
Mhm.
you're bringing this to the conversation. And I want to stay right here for a moment. Unconscious, make the unconscious conscious. When you talked about how that's just, the way it is kind of
Yeah.
mentality that shows up, I want you to reflect on how do you think that mentality, what are the implications of that mentality when we think about the political landscape right now and how
Mhm.
so many people have already felt defeated even before the current administration was in place because people were starting to devalue DEI, even before that, we saw the signs coming. And now that there is a new administration in place and they are definitely leaning into trying to get rid of anything that stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, some people are feeling even more defeated. And maybe they're thinking, this is the fate. We need to just give up. We don't need to try. I'm seeing some sentiments of that. And so I
Mhm.
just would love for you to just share your thoughts and reflections on how this concept of make the unconscious conscious is maybe showing up today as it relates to organizations and their positions and stance on continuing to sustain the work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. Like, people are rightfully worried. This is a worrying time. I wrote an article for Fortune, I think last year, near the end of last year, about the potential for Donald Trump to bring in a colorblind Jim Crow 2.0. And yeah, we're kind of here. And so it is this idea that, hey, nobody's discriminating against anybody. If Black people aren't represented, it's just because they're not qualified.
Yeah.
And we're not going to look at disparate impact. We're not going to look, and so there's a lot of reason to be fearful because this is a really difficult moment, and that mindset that we don't, in fact, we do not want to look, we do not want to make the unconscious conscious. We actually want to call that fate, that it is the fate of you. And that's why we're not interested in the real reason. We're just going to look at I talk about when the hand of systemic inequity is hidden, you can misidentify the result as the cause,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is not, the way it should be working. That said, we have roadmaps from history that give us a sense of where to go. Unfortunately, as Black Americans, we have been through this before. And so during Jim Crow, which lasts almost 100 years, we also have the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah.
During that time, we have Black Wall Street, although
Mhm.
obviously it got destroyed.
Yeah.
We have never stopped iterating on ourselves, stopped
Mm.
trying, stopped growing, stopped pushing.
So
I think
true.
I think the difference in this moment is that for the first time, white people are seeing the danger also directed toward them. And I
Yeah.
think historically, when it was just directed toward us, it was easier for people to justify or to ignore. But as I call it the eye in the sky, as the eye in the
Yeah.
sky turns ever increasingly toward them, I think we actually have a chance, a shot at a true interracial, intergender, interethnic coalition to push back because we now have more people seeing what we've always seen. You know, that we
Yeah.
know the eye in the sky has been focused on us. But now that other people are feeling that glare, I think there is potentially a narrow opportunity. And I also think there's an opportunity that the courts could truly be a backstop, not because they're so great, but because of self-interest. Most people don't
Mm,
want to invalidate their own power.
of
And there
course.
are
Yeah.
certain ways that the Supreme Court is going to have to rule, or else they're going to be invalidating their own power. So I
Yeah.
think there's some glimmers, but I told when I did my book launch, there was a young lady there and I said, I just can't lie. This is a rocky road. This is a
Very
tough
much
thing.
so.
And this we haven't seen anything like this since the end of Reconstruction. None of us were alive then. So none of us have really lived through anything like this. So this is a tough situation, but we're tough people. So
Yeah, we're tough people. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. So we have to remain vigilant in how in which we are continuing to stay alert of what's happening and how things are quickly evolving. And I too believe that there is this reckoning now of broader populations of people outside of those who are on the margins, thinking about the implications to them, right? So it does feel a
Mhm.
bit more closer to home, a bit more personal. And we've seen that even with the numbers of people that have shown up to a lot of the anti Trump protests, right? And I think that's kind of a sign of that shift that's occurring. And even like the numbers people have been reporting on at the 100-day mark in terms of how favorable or unfavorable people are viewing the current administration. So lots to unpack with that. I want to alert this audience that I will give you an opportunity to share your questions and your comments. And so if you would like to do so and you're part of our Zoom community, then use the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing to be added to the spotlight if your camera is on. But even if it's not, I will invite you to unmute yourself and share directly, or feel free to go to the chat and we'll take as many of your questions and comments as time will allow. If you're joining us LinkedIn Live, we've not forgotten about you. Go to the comment section. My team is watching that closely. We're bringing it over. And again, you will also have a chance to present your thoughts and questions. While you are thinking about those curiosities, I want to go to the next question. And this relates to storytelling. You know, you may have heard in the beginning when I talked about the storytelling cultural framework that we're doing here at NWC. And I really do believe in the value of storytelling. I have a whole chapter in my latest book that's all about storytelling for connection and inclusion. And I know that we are aligned in that regard. As your background and journalist, and then you've been published in outlets like Time and The Hill and interviewed icons like Harry Belafonte, as I mentioned, and Julian Bond. How storytelling influence, Sherry, your work in advancing systems change?
Well, messaging and storytelling, as you say, is key, and it's something that I don't think people on, quote, this side of
Yeah,
the fight have always used
yeah,
effectively. It's been a little confusing to people. It's not as clear as it could be. So clarity is really important to me in storytelling. Really, I want to illuminate something.
mhm,
Yesterday I did a seminar after the keynote for a group of faculty and staff at Oregon State University. And after it, one of the men, a white man, came up to me. He said, what's interesting, you only said the word intersectionality once. He's like, but everything you described the intersection. I said, that's the goal.
yeah,
I need you to understand the components of what I'm talking about. I don't need you to get all hung up on a word. I need you to
yeah,
I need to be descriptive enough that you can come up with the image, right? And so, in the book, I have this chapter called For Black Girls Who've Considered Quitting When Sisterhood Would Have Been Enough. And I
yeah,
married that with the unmasking because I want Black and white women to talk to each other in a way we haven't been able to, but I have to be descriptive. I have to help people understand the specifics. And so, honestly, one of the people who's influenced me most is James Baldwin. I think James Baldwin is one of
oh
the most
yes,
incisive, concise people of describing the Black American experience and the American experience and its limitations in a way that is devastatingly clear, you know. And so when I think about my book, I think about this overwhelming influence of James Baldwin's narratives and his conversations, debates, you know,
Yeah,
the all of the things he was involved in, which really accurately and concisely got to the point so that
great.
people could not deny the point. So that's what I think of when I think of that communication piece.
Yeah. So what's coming up for me is the specificity, the clarity, and also the simplicity of, taking really complex messages and being able to
Mhm.
distill it down in a way
Yes.
where we can send people off pretty quickly to start really processing it, right?
Mhm.
And as someone who is an over communicator, I value, the likes of Baldwin who can really do that in a very powerful way. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions come through, so I'm going to keep rolling, but the opportunity is still out there. I'm going to go to the next question. I talked about your consulting firm. I'm the boss of me. And so I want to, have you put on your CEO hat of I'm the boss of me. And I want you to talk about maybe some of the strategies that have proven most effective in driving sustainable institutional transformation.
Well, you know, it's funny. It's absolutely related to what we were just discussing, which is communication and, you know, how you clarify messaging. So
Yeah.
one of the things I work with companies on is communicating across difference. It
Yes.
is, I believe, at its core, fundamentally the biggest source of confusion, problems, and issues in most businesses. And it's
Yeah.
shocking to me how much it's like the elephant in the room for most, and it breaks down to things like lack of transparency when there's no need not to be transparent,
Mhm.
confusion about process, which causes people to feel they're being discriminated against and being treated unfairly when maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You just have such a terrible process, a lack of understanding and a misreading of how different people communicate, and that misreading being the source of the problem, not the actual information. And so for me, I really spend time with people on this concept of what does it mean to communicate across our differences. And I'm not talking about disc type or Myers-Briggs or any of that,
Yeah.
which I consider junk science, but the actual differences, race,
Hmm.
gender, ethnicity, class. What does that
Yeah.
mean, and how is it sending us into a misfire, right? Because it
Yeah.
is causing us to misfire. And people will often say, well, I don't have time, you know, we have so much. I'm like, you have time for a bunch of confusion. You have time for things to
Right.
go wrong. You have time for things
Yeah.
to take 3 times longer than they should have. Sometimes people have to go slow to go fast, but they think they got to
Yes.
go fast to go fast. They actually sometimes need to go slow to go fast. And what we know is when we are in that deliberative process stage, everything is better, not just equity, not just diversity, but everything is better. And this cycles back to diversity, equity, inclusion. In order to have a truly diverse, equitable, inclusive workplace, you have to go a little slower. You have to be more
Yeah.
deliberate because it's just how our brains work. But that
Mm.
slowness and deliberation inures to the benefit of your work, of your content overall. We as a society believe that going fast and breaking things or whatever, you know, rich, you know, men in Silicon Valley say, that's not the thing. You know, going deliberately, clearly, so that everybody understands where they're going. You don't have 20 people going 18 different directions is the issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's what I think is important. I saw a
Slowing
question.
down.
Yeah, I saw a question.
Simple but yeah, we'll get to that question in just a moment.
Yeah.
But yes, slowing down, that is profound because we do live in a society to where fast pace is just kind of
Mhm.
part of how we're conditioned to think that we need to operate, which is why there's all of these groups like the Rest Ministry and so many others that are telling us,
Mhm.
especially those of us who are women of color and Black women, to rest and really lean into that. But I love that you brought to the conversation the importance of effective communication across difference that goes beyond, again, some of those assessments, because the gridlock always shows up when we don't know how to navigate that. I also love that. I don't know if you all caught this, but when you said you were given examples and you said no need when transparency issues, when there's no need to be transparent about it. We need to unpack that at some point in a different conversation because why are
Yeah.
we safeguarding so much information? And sometimes you're like, well, why is that not something that is more just public knowledge so that everyone can be set up for success? Well, I'm answering my own question because the goal is not always for everyone to be set up for success. Okay, let's take
Well,
this
but I
last.
do, I do want to give you another piece of the answer too, which is that we all culturally have ways of communication.
Yeah.
Being African American, being Latinx Hispanic, coming from different regions, being a Southerner versus a Northerner. White people have a dominant way of communicating too, as a culture. And one of the hallmarks of that communication style is not sharing information, even when
Yes.
information. So that's the whole thing. If we can open up the fact that we all have different communication styles, and those styles could be either causing us to misread, causing us to hide information when it's not necessary. So that's the whole thing about really digging into the fact that we do all have cultural ways of communicating.
Absolutely. And there's so many white people that I have encountered that do not even own the fact that they have
Mhm.
their own culture. It's like we don't,
Right.
they don't see
Right.
culture as something being identified with, the white population, which is
Mhm.
interesting in and of itself. Where I see the speed issue really takes place right now is in all of the AI stuff. They're having to pull back and they're having to regroup and change things because, yeah, it's all about speed, speed, speed. And that is allowing so many of those AI technologies to miss the mark and to create
Mhm.
harm. Okay, so we're going to try to squeeze in this question. What was your most challenging process with writing your book? And how can we encourage others to not give up in the midst of what's going on today?
Wow. The most challenging process of writing my book, I have that ready, was I was trying to get up very early in the morning to write a book, and I am not an early person. And I finally was talking to, I had at the time, I had a counselor, a therapist I was talking to, and I mentioned to her, I said, I'm not writing anything. And she said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm trying to get up at 5 a.m. and I'm trying to get, and she said to me, do you get up at 5 a.m. for any other reason? I'm like, no, I hate to get up early. And she's
Good
like, well,
point.
then why are you trying to create, early when that is not what? So I had to learn to write the way I wrote. And
Yeah,
once I learned to write the way I wrote, then things flowed quickly. And I was able to get things done. And that means sometimes I write in the afternoon, sometimes in the
yeah,
morning, sometimes at night, sometimes I'm just talking something into something. So I had to get out of the notion that there was a right way to write. And
yeah.
as far as how can people not feel, what was it? Not feel.
How can we just feel hopeful, I guess, in the midst of all that's going on today?
Yeah, again, I think there is hope in that there is this theory called spiral dynamics that for every leap forward in the society, there's a pullback. And
Yeah.
after that pullback, there's a double leap forward. So let's say there's
Yes.
a leap forward once, there's a half pullback or a full pullback, that we are still in the process of forward, but forward has a natural pullback. And so, and we are in a situation where a lot more people finally see what we've always seen, and they can hear what we've always heard about what's going on. And that in and of itself has some validation and power to it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. I don't think I've ever heard someone kind of articulate an answer in that way, especially as we think about keeping and maintaining hope, because that is so important right now when we are constantly feeling, our nervous system being activated by all that's going on with the anxiety and the uncertainty. And when we think about some past experiences, that is exactly true. We have seen a rise when we have been hit with a really big crisis. The hope, though, is that the one crisis that so many people point to as it relates to just diversity, equity, and inclusion of most recent would be George Floyd's murder. And how, yes, we did see this pivot forward, right? There was so
Mhm.
many people wanting to rise to the occasion and do things differently to meet the moment. And while that lasted for a short period of time, it then went away, it dissipated, right? And then we saw people pulling back. And so I would love to get your thoughts on what can we do once we find ourselves kind of coming out of this, whatever timing that's going to be, to try to help maintain a sense of commitment to staying to course, no matter how much time may lapse.
Yeah, well, how much time it's going to take to come out of this is a question that might
That's
make
why I
us
said
depressed
wherever,
again.
whenever
Yeah, it
that
might
might
make us
be.
depressed again. But I think our commitment has to be to building coalitions. And we,
Yes.
as people of color, have to find a way to break down our walls that separate us. Black Americans are
True.
very well worried about erasure. I get it. We don't want to be swept up in our individual stories, but we are
Yeah.
not going to get through this alone.
Yeah.
No one group is going to get through this situation
Mm.
alone. We need each other. And we need to find ways to honor our individual stories, but collectively understand our shared oppression and work together. And we need coalition of the willing because we just can't go it
Mm.
alone. And so I think that together there is this possibility of scaling change. And we have to take our civic obligations seriously, such as voting.
Absolutely.
We literally are going to have to vote in the midterms like our lives depend on it because our lives do, in fact,
They
depend.
do.
And we're going to have to start doing what others have done. We're going to have to start looking at these school board seats. We're going to have to start organizing locally. We are going to have to find a way to work together in ways we haven't seen and done since probably, the height of the civil rights movement. And it's going to require all of us to step up in new and unique ways.
Yeah, a beautiful call to action as we close out our time together today. Community and connectedness, it is key. We have placed into the chat your website, Sherry, your Substack, information for your book, your LinkedIn. I hope that you all will connect and to definitely gain value from the rich content that Sherry puts out. We are so glad that you were able to be with us today. Thank you so much for
Thank
making time.
you.
We know that it's early in your part of the country, and so we're even more grateful for that. Thank you all for showing up and being a part of our community. If this was very helpful for you and you found it of value, be sure to share it out with someone in your network. And I want to give you the chance to close this out, sharing whatever way that feels appropriate. What would you like to leave this audience with?
Well, power concedes nothing without demand. It never has and it never will. And so
Yes.
we are going to have to demand our rights, and we're going to have to find a way to hold the line together. And I believe we can do that.
You too. Thank you all. Have a safe and weekend. We hope to see you again next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations. Thanks so much for being a part of our community. Bye bye.
Thank you.